Tonight, there is one question above all in Europe. Where is Wallonia? This tiny region of Belgium just scuppered a trade deal between the EU and Canada that had been 7 years in the making. So is this the kind of bizarre turn upon which our future may soon hang? Our Europe editor James Mates on Theresa May's dismal welcome at the EU summit and this latest twist. Also on News at 10 tonight. It doesn't look much like a symbol of power. The Russian aircraft carrier belching smoke on its way through the channel and what it says about Moscow's intentions. Silence for Aberfan, remembering the children and adults who died in the disaster 50 years ago. The man who just can't shut up. Now Trump even has a go at Hillary at a charity dinner.
Here she is tonight, in public, pretending not to hate Catholics.
And ground control to Major Tom. Is this the end of missions to Mars?
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Have you ever been to one of those parties where no one seems pleased to see you and you wondered why you came? Well, it seems a pretty fair summation of Theresa May's first EU summit. She wouldn't have been expecting anyone to be exactly swinging from the chandeliers, but even so, she might not have anticipated quite so much tough talking. And as if to emphasise just how complex the negotiations upon which our future will depend could be, a small region of Belgium no one has ever even heard of, if you're familiar with Wallonia, I apologise, obviously, managed to scupper an EU trade deal with Canada, which has been 7 years in the making. A reminder, if our negotiators needed one, of just how difficult doing these deals can be.
Not until 1 in the morning, as the last coffee cups were being cleared from the dinner table, did Mrs May finally get to speak to her fellow leaders about Brexit, and then only for 5 minutes. With Russian ships in the Channel and an ongoing migration crisis, their minds were clearly elsewhere, not least on a free trade deal with Canada that is in big trouble and which should serve as a stark warning to Britain. 50 miles from Brussels in the Belgian region of Wallonia, a parliament that represents just 3.5 million people is blocking 500 million Europeans signing a deal with the Canadians. We never paid much attention to the Walloons before, but we're going to have to now. Because, as the region's Prime Minister reminded me, he will hold the exact same veto power over any post-Brexit deal between Europe and the UK.
Can you imagine a scenario in which this Parliament here would block a trade agreement between Britain and the EU?
I hope this will not happen, because I hope we will be consulted much earlier in the process. If we can give a mandate, we will be very clear in the mandate about what for us are the basic requirements.
But you have the power to do it.
We have the power to do it.
Stop CETA! Stop CETA!
Outside, anti-globalisation protesters who oppose more or less any trade deal with anyone promise they too may fight the ratification of any future UK deal.
And if the same provisions are in the deal with the UK, we will oppose it just with the same strength.
Canada's Trade Minister had flown to Wallonia to plead personally. Her verdict was pretty damning.
Il semble évident pour moi, pour le Canada.
It's now evident to me, evident to Canada, she said, that the European Union is incapable of reaching an agreement. Even with a country with European values such as Canada, even with a country as nice and as patient as Canada. And back in Brussels, even European leaders are in despair at what the possible collapse of this deal, known as CETA, may mean.
I am afraid that it means that CETA could be our last free trade agreement.
To my mind, if there are all these problems to have a simple trade agreement with Canada, just imagine an agreement with the United Kingdom. Thank you.
If Theresa May does decide to go for a hard Brexit, Britain will need some sort of deal, and within just 2 years. But she insists the UK is going to be different.
We're not looking to adopt another model that somebody else has in relation to their trade with the European Union. What we want is to develop what is a new relationship for the UK with the EU.
For the UK, of course, that relationship will not be a luxury but an economic necessity. And nothing that's happened at this, her first summit, suggests it's going to be easy.
And James joins us now. James, this Wallonia business, I don't quite know how to put it, but it seems a touch bizarre. Can you just talk us through its significance?
Well, really the significant thing is that if we are leaving the single market, as was strongly signalled at the Tory conference, we're going to have to trade with Europe in one of two ways. Either on WTO, World Trade Organization rules, which means customs and tariffs on everything we import and export, 10%, for example, on every car, or we try and do a free trade agreement like the Canadians. Do you remember this Canadian option was one of the things talked about extensively during the referendum campaign? A British deal would be far more complicated because the Canadians didn't even include services, and that, of course, is our biggest industry. So, you know, if the Canadians can't do it, suddenly we're faced with a real prospect that perhaps we couldn't either.
It feels like, in one sense, it's an argument for why we should be leaving the EU, and at the same time, an argument for why we shouldn't. I mean, in the end, I guess it's just a bit embarrassing for the European Union as a whole.
No, very, very embarrassing. I mean, they've got this weekend to try and flatter and strong-arm the Wallonian Prime Minister into changing his mind, but they haven't cancelled the signing ceremony on Wednesday night yet, but no one is really at all optimistic. But I mean, from our point of view, it does tell us two things. One, when people say, look, Europe's bound to give us a deal that's favourable. It's in their own interest. Well, this deal was very much in Europe's own interests, and it does look as if this deal may not get done. The other point is that when people say it's going to be straightforward to do a deal with Europe, and senior ministers have made this claim, well, you'd only have to ask the Canadians tonight how sceptical they would be about that. And I think we should be sceptical.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Now, the Prime Minister did manage to find some common ground with her French and German colleagues, joining them to call for further sanctions on Russia over its bombardment of Aleppo. That failed to win the support of other EU leaders, though. And as the arguments were batted to and fro, the Russians made their own statement in their own way, sailing their armada of warships through the English Channel.
A short distance from the cross-channel port and visible from the White Cliffs of Dover, a Russian aircraft carrier entered the English Channel this morning. The Admiral Kuznetsov, Russia's only aircraft carrier, had positioned some fighter jets on the deck. She was following a guided missile destroyer. The Russian Navy was not trying to be discreet as it sailed past the Strait of Dover. It wanted to be seen.
Russia at the moment is looking for any way it can get its point across, and one of those points is deterrence. They want to make other countries apprehensive about the consequences of doing things that Russia does not like.
A convoy of Russian ships left the Arctic port of Severomorsk on Saturday. It includes Russia's only aircraft carrier, which carries up to 50 fighter jets and helicopters. When it entered the North Sea, the Royal Navy frigate HMS Richmond tracked the fleet, and further south, the destroyer HMS Duncan kept watch at a distance of 5 miles as the Russians passed through the English Channel at 9 o'clock this morning. The fleet is to join 10 other combat vessels off the coast of Syria in the Mediterranean. But Russia does not need these aircraft-based jets. It already has an airbase in Latakia in Syria, which is why most agree this convoy is all about show.
Well, the Russians are plainly very angry after the breakdown of the ceasefire discussions in Syria. They're very worried about how the West might react, and in particular how the United States might react following the possible election of a President Clinton, and they're putting on a very firm demonstration of their determination not to be pushed around by the West.
Which is why these ships are heading towards Aleppo, a city which already has Russian troops on the streets and doesn't need any more Russian weaponry. But Russian aggression was attacked in Geneva at the UN's Human Rights Council today. A British-led resolution was passed to look into human rights violations in Aleppo.
The actions of Assad and Russia are driving radicalization and fueling terrorism and not tackling it. Russia, you are making the situation worse, not solving it.
But in the busy shipping lanes of the English Channel earlier, Russia passed through, showing the West it will do what it likes. And if it wants to fire missiles into Aleppo from jets based on its aircraft carrier, then it will. Chris Ship, News at 10.
With Iraqi forces closing in on Mosul, the stronghold of the so-called Islamic State in Iraq, the terror group launched a counter-offensive today, attacking police in the city of Kirkuk, 100 miles down the road. At least 18 members of the security forces were killed, as well as several workers who were hit by a suicide bomb attack on the city's power station. Some 8 militants were killed. Several dozen remain holed up in a mosque and a hotel tonight. Like here, we still don't know whether or not the package blown up by police on the London Tube network yesterday was a viable bomb or not. But counter-terrorism officers moved in today to arrest a 19-year-old man in connection with it. He was tasered and detained by armed officers in the middle of a busy street, and he's being questioned tonight.
24 hours after what seemed like an everyday security alert, Scotland Yard officers arrested a 19-year-old man. Counter-terrorism police closing a busy street, firing a taser gun. In an operation with an air of absolute urgency, a man was detained in the street.
I was just walking along and I heard the police officers shout, "Down, down, down." And I saw the aftermath of it. Police takedown over there where 3 or 4 cops converged on a guy, and then 2 police cars came that way, 2 blocked off there, and one with a automatic rifle hopped over the fence and pinned down the guy.
This is where the operation began yesterday, across London in North Greenwich. A suspicious item was found at a tube station. That's common, but rarely are investigators so concerned that they decide to blow it up. Still tonight, they're trying to work out whether it was a viable device or an amateur attempt at one. And the man arrested here in North London is still being questioned on suspicion of the commission, preparation and instigation of terrorism acts.
And Rohit joins me now. Rohit, I mean, in essence, how seriously are the authorities taking this?
Well, they can't yet say with certainty whether this was an act of terrorism. That's a question about ideology, about intention, about motive as well, and they haven't quite got to conclusions there. What's clearer are the questions about the method. This appears to have been a device that included wires and a clock. That doesn't mean it was a bomb, but what investigators seem to be concluding is that it wasn't a hoax. Now what we have is an investigation that is almost unique in Britain in recent years. Arrests under terrorism law are fairly common, almost one every single day. What's rarer is for arrests on suspicion of actually preparing an act of terrorism in the UK. Rarer still for people to be arrested in connection with an actual device being discovered. One final point, though, what seemed to be clear now, according to investigators, is that this was the only person involved, or suspected of being involved. There is no network, there is no cell here.
OK, Rohit, for now at least, thank you very much indeed. Now, London City Airport has reopened tonight after a chemical incident forced hundreds of people to be evacuated. The alert was triggered when a number of passengers suffered breathing difficulties. A CS gas spray thought to have been discarded by a passenger has since been discovered. Some travellers were also left trapped in parked planes when all flights in and out of the airport were halted. Police now say the area has been declared safe. The people of Aberfan need no reminders, of course, of what happened there exactly half a century ago. 116 children and 28 adults were killed by an avalanche of coal waste which slid down a hillside onto a school. Today, 50 years on, it was marked with a silence and a chance to reflect on exactly what was lost from the small mining community in South Wales.
It's a new generation at Aberfan School, heads bowed as they were across Wales. Silence descended in the valley where tragedy struck with such force 50 years ago. Remembering a younger sister, Denise Morgan stops at 9:15, the time Annette died along with so many classmates.
It's her birthday now coming up and she'll be 60.
So everybody's thinking now, what would she be like? What would she be doing? Would she be married? What would her job have been? Would she have children of her own?
A future lost when an avalanche of slurry loosened by days of heavy rain came down the hillside through Pantglas Junior School, where lessons had just begun. Queen Elizabeth, herself a young mother, came 8 days after the disaster to offer what comfort she could. On the same streets 5 decades later, Prince Charles was there to share this landmark anniversary with the community.
No one should have to bear the losses you suffered, but no one could have borne those losses with greater strength or greater courage.
It was the first time Dennis Moss has returned to Aberfan since that day in 1966, when he'd driven up from Cardiff as an 18-year-old army cadet determined to help.
But coming to the village today, I had a strange feeling in me. It's an eerie feeling which I can't even describe. But now that I've come here, I don't feel so bad. I feel like I've got out of my system. It was just utter chaos at one stage where everybody was doing something, and there was so much debris everywhere, especially the slurry that came down from the hill. It just seemed to have buried the school. It was like something like a bomb had hit it, you know.
Devastation that brought a huge response from around the world. Eventually, £1.5 million was raised.
Incredible as it seems now, the people of Aberfan struggled to get the help they needed. They repeatedly asked the coal board to remove tips that were still looming over this community. When it wasn't done, they had to pay for it themselves, using £150,000 from their charity fund.
But today was for reflection, for families to remember everything they'd lost. Marilyn Brown's thoughts were with her daughter, Jeanette.
I think about her all the time. I don't think you'll ever stop thinking about them, you know, and she's with me all the time. I go up the cemetery and I put flowers and I think, no, she's not up here. She's with me wherever I am in the house, she's with me.
She was joined today by countless others who paused to remember the overwhelming loss of this small mining village. Juliet Bremner, News at 10, Aberfan.
And all of the tributes and commemorations from Aberfan today are on our website, itv.com/news. Now, Sir Philip Green, the former owner of BHS, may have promised to sort out the company's pension black hole, but the man he sold it to has told News at 10 his offer has come far too late. Under Dominic Chappell, BHS went bust. He says it wouldn't have done had Sir Philip intervened earlier. And he said even if he does now pump in hundreds of millions of pounds, he doesn't deserve to keep his knighthood.
BHS's pension schemes are deep in deficit and no longer have a company to support them. Sir Philip has pledged to sort the funding problem, but Dominic Chappell says Sir Philip made a similar pledge when he sold BHS to him last year.
If Sir Philip had delivered on his promise, there'd be 11,000 people still in employment, British Home Stores would still have its doors open, and Philip would have saved a vast amount of money.
If he sorts out the pension now, do you think he should be allowed to keep his knighthood?
No, he's buying his honour. He should have dealt with this 4 months ago. He should have dealt with this 3 years ago. He should have dealt with the pension problem.
When you watched MPs laying into Sir Philip, you feel angry with him, but did you not feel a twinge of sympathy?
I thought the MPs were just baying for blood. It was a pathetic show. I was not happy with what they were saying.
Do you think this is a witch hunt?
It is, to a certain degree, it is a witch hunt. But Philip has overstepped the mark on this one, for sure.
In a statement tonight, Sir Philip Green described Dominic Chappell's allegation that he'd failed to fix the pension deficit as extraordinary and unfounded. Sir Philip said Arcadia, his company, had committed up to £50 million to address the shortfall. And he added that Mr Chappell and his company, Retail Acquisitions Limited, had entered into various covenants relating to the pension as part of the purchase agreement. 20,000 people are members of BHS's pension schemes, which are in deficit to the tune of £571 million. Now, Sir Philip is working on a plan which would see 13,000 members take a cash lump sum in lieu of their pension, and 7,000 members continue to get a full pension, but with less generous annual increases going forward. Now, ITV News understands that Sir Philip has been told the cost to him of such a solution would be more than £300 million. Sir Philip sold BHS a year before it went bust and says he plans to secure the pension savings of staff as an act of goodwill. But the pensions regulator is investigating whether he has a legal obligation to.
I'm not sure whether the pension regulator can bring a legal case. A lot of information has come into the public domain. Work and Pension Select Committee have asked a lot of questions. They've got dozens of documents. I can't see a smoking gun. So I think at best it's 50-50 that the pension regulator, who said that they would go live by the beginning of next year, I think it's about 50-50 that the regulator has a case.
In the end, no one rode to BHS's rescue. The company is no more. Members of the pension schemes will be hoping for a better outcome. But if Sir Philip does deal with the deficit, it will cost him a significant part of his fortune. Joel Hills, News at 10.
A retired police superintendent who managed to sue a host of newspapers for accusing him of being a paedophile was today convicted of indecently assaulting 2 teenage boys in North Wales. Gordon Anglesey committed the offences in the 1980s. He won more than £300,000 when articles linking him to separate sexual abuses appeared in the 90s. He now faces jail.
Gordon Anglesey was a police officer for 34 years. He retired with the rank of superintendent.
Good morning, how are you?
But today a jury decided that he abused that position to carry out sexual assaults on vulnerable young boys.
People expect, rightly, better from the police. It's therefore really important for me to apologise on behalf of North Wales Police to those victims who I've no doubt were extremely traumatised.
Anglesey was in charge of this facility near Wrexham, where boys would be sent if they'd got in trouble with the law. They'd take part in running and exercise sessions, and afterwards the policemen would lurk in the showers while they washed. One man who attended as a boy and gave evidence at the trial says his behaviour was always disturbing.
We didn't know really what sex was all about at the time, but you know, you got like the gist of like something wasn't right, if you know what I mean. And he was just like standing at the showers, looking at everybody, and you could feel him staring a hole straight through you.
What was it about, the way he was looking at you?
It was just the way he stood there, you know, and he just couldn't take his eyes off us, if you know what I mean. And just like looking up and down the line.
Anglesey's name has long been familiar to investigators of abuse in North Wales. In the 1990s, a file was prepared, but prosecutors never brought it to court. Witnesses and victims say many in the region who knew what was happening in the 70s and 80s were simply too scared to speak out.
Nobody did anything?
Nobody did anything. We're too frightened. Too frightened. You know, you just get stitched up for anything.
25 years ago, allegations were made about Gordon Anglesey. He denied them, took legal action and won substantial damages. One of the witnesses in that case wasn't here for today's verdict. He took his own life in 1995. Gordon Anglesey heard today he'll spend the rest of his life in jail. Damon Green, News at 10, North Wales.
It is difficult to remember an American presidential campaign that has been quite so bitter. Even at a charity dinner last night, traditionally a chance for the candidates to poke some light-hearted fun at each other, Donald Trump couldn't hide his contempt for Hillary Clinton. His ill-tempered rhetoric does appear, though, to be playing into her hand. She now has a healthy lead in the polls, always supposing the polls are right. But the campaign's tone is dividing whole communities, even families up and down America.
Thank you. Even at a charity dinner in New York, famed for its humour, the attempt at laughter was short-lived, and the venomous nature of this campaign quickly became apparent. Donald Trump was booed when he started making personal attacks.
Hillary is so corrupt. She got kicked off the Watergate Commission.
The jeers grew louder still when he mocked her struggle to win the Catholic vote.
here she is tonight in public, pretending not to hate Catholics.
Mrs. Clinton returned fire, scathingly referring to Trump's habit of ranking women out of 10 for their looks.
People look at the Statue of Liberty and they see a proud symbol. Donald looks at the Statue of Liberty and sees a 4. Maybe a 5 if she loses the torch and tablet and changes her hair.
If the exchanges were painful in this room, the fury and acrimony of campaign 2016 is being felt in every town across America. We visited the small community of Boulder City in Nevada, just a 30-minute drive from the Las Vegas debate venue, to see how the relentlessly negative Trump-Clinton war of words has impacted people and their view of politics.
This country is so divided right now that I think it's worse than it could have been during the Civil War.
For Bob Rader, this toxic campaign has caused genuine personal distress.
I lean one way, I have 2 brothers that lean the other way, and we hardly speak to each other anymore.
It's that divided?
Yes.
Brother against brother?
Yes.
There's a lot of hate, a lot of divisions between people, ethnic groups, religions. I don't ever remember, I'm 70 years old, and I don't ever remember it being like this.
There's been a lot of name calling, a lot of disturbing comments that it's going to be difficult to overcome. It truly will be.
At the very next table are Ted and Julia, siblings who also can't mention the campaign.
If you talked politics, it would quickly get into sort of tricky waters.
Yeah, it would. I think so.
Ted blames the candidates for the shocking tone of the national conversation.
Because they both have a lot of baggage to carry around, you know, with Trump and several wives, and Hillary with all the lying she does.
After conversations like those in a small town like this, it is clear how daunting the next president's mission will be. Families and communities deeply divided by this campaign. In Boulder City, like in almost every town in America, Election Day and the inauguration are likely to highlight and not heal the rift. Robert Moore, News at 10, Nevada.
And finally, it has been a nerve-wracking few days for the scientists of the European Space Agency, who've been hoping against hope that their spacecraft had made it safely to Mars. But tonight, as they had been starting to suspect, it was all but confirmed that it had indeed crash-landed.
This is the Meridiani Planum on Mars, before the European Space Agency's Schiaparelli robot paid a visit. And here it is yesterday. The black dot is where the lander hit the ground. The white spot, a kilometre to the south, is its 12-metre wide parachute. Scientists on Earth had lost contact with Schiaparelli just a few minutes before it was due to land at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. They maintained hopes that it would phone home for 2 days, until the pictures came through today, leading to only one inevitable conclusion.
I believe we have found where Schiaparelli landed. This didn't land softly as we would have liked to, because the final phase of descent and landing did not function nominally.
The Schiaparelli robot was deployed to the planet's surface on Wednesday afternoon. As it fell, it recorded data about the Martian atmosphere. Its heat shield seems to have worked fine, and so did its parachute, which slowed the lander down. Then, rockets were meant to fire for several minutes to slow it down further for a safe landing. But that didn't happen. Scientists now think the rockets switched off just after a few seconds, so Schiaparelli ended up slamming into the Martian surface at more than 185 miles an hour. It's possible that it exploded on impact. Schiaparelli won't be seen as a total failure, though, because of the information it's already sent back.
It's a very mixed bag of feelings at the moment. We'd have loved to have had that last little bit of surface science, but actually the Amelia experiment is all about understanding the atmosphere as we fly through it, its structure and its density. So we're going to recover nearly all the science we were expecting to get.
A more detailed picture of the crash site will be taken next week, and that should give scientists better information about what went wrong with Schiaparelli. Meanwhile, its mothership, the Trace Gas Orbiter, is now working well around the red planet, and it'll begin its scientific work of studying the planet's atmosphere. Alok Jha, News at 10.
Stand by camera 2.
And that is it for now. But if you look to the skies tonight and can avoid the cloud where you are, you might spot quite from Halley's Comet. I will be back on Monday. In the meantime, I hope you have a brilliant weekend. Thank you for watching.